Tonight on Bridge City News, Toronto's mayor speaks out after a mass shooting in his city's Greektown, which leaves 2 dead and 13 injured. Humboldt Broncos paralyzed hockey player Ryan Strechnitsky is back home in Alberta to continue his therapy. And the UCP party comes up big in a couple of provincial by-elections. Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. The city of Toronto is still reeling after a mass shooting that left 3 dead and 13 others wounded last night. An 18-year-old woman died along with a 10-year-old girl. The shooter was also killed as he exchanged gunfire with police. The incident occurred around 10 o'clock last night on the Danforth in Greektown when a 29-year-old man walked up to a restaurant and opened fire. Toronto Mayor John Tory expressed grief and support for the families of the victims. Tory said he would pursue the topic of gun reform following the tragedy.
This is an attack against innocent families and against our entire city. This is a tragedy, another tragedy in our city this year. I promise all of the people of Toronto, but most importantly those directly affected by this tragedy, that we will all be relentless in getting answers about why this senseless attack happened. Our entire city has been shocked by this cowardly act of violence. As I said earlier this morning at the scene, I'm of course angry, as we all are, that someone would carry out such an attack, which really amounts to an attack on our city itself. Gun violence in any part of our city is horrible and completely unacceptable. I've said for some time that the city has a gun problem, in that guns are far too readily available to far too many people. It is something I spoke about very directly at a federal government conference held late last year on acts of violence. As I've said repeatedly, this is an international problem and this is a domestic problem. There are far too many people carrying around guns in our city and our region who should not have them. You've heard me ask the question of why anybody would need to buy 10 or 20 guns, which they can lawfully do under the present laws. And that leads to another question we need to discuss. Why does anyone in this city need to have a gun at all?
Toronto Police Chief Mark Saunders says he will not speculate on a motive to the shooting in Toronto last night.
When you have this many people that are struck by gunfire, it's a grave concern. I certainly want to find out exactly what it is, and so I'm not closing any doors or any chapters on this, and I certainly don't want to speculate as well, too. So once we have a better concrete picture of exactly what happened and what the motivation was behind it, we definitely will be having a further conversation on that.
But you are calling it a random shooting?
No, I'm not calling it random. This person was here, and he definitely shot. I don't know why he did what he did. He won't be able to tell us because he is deceased, but I can tell you as law enforcement, it's important for us to try to break it down, right down to the minutiae, to figure out exactly what happened and why it happened.
Lethbridge MP Rachel Harder was on Bridge City News recently discussing gun control. She agrees that guns should be taken out of the hands of criminals, but Ottawa's new gun legislation, Bill C-71, won't do that. Instead, she says it penalizes farmers and ranchers.
You know, Bill C-71, what it does is it essentially, goes after those who already legally own their firearms. They're the ones that are going to have to register them. They're the ones that are going to be held accountable with regards to licensing. Meanwhile, those who are a part of gang violence or, organized criminal activity, or those who are participating in rural crime, those are the individuals who are going to continue to go and possess their firearms illegally. They're going to acquire their firearms in a back alley somewhere rather than going to a store and properly acquiring them.
Harder is also sponsoring an anti-Bill C-71 firearms petition. More details can be found on her website. Authorities say 1 person is dead and another injured following a shooting at a Mormon church in Nevada yesterday. Police say the suspect surrendered to police officers.
Upon arrival, officers observed 2 persons that were injured by gunfire. 1 person has subsequently died. The other is currently undergoing treatment for what's reported as a non-life-threatening leg wound. The alleged shooter, John K. O'Connor of 901 McKay Court in Fallon, was a member of the church and had been attending services prior to the shooting. After the shooting, he left the church on foot and returned to his home. Officers and sheriff's deputies surrounded the home while a hostage negotiator called in. After placing phone calls to the home, Mr. O'Connor agreed to exit the property and surrendered officers.
Paralyzed Humboldt Broncos player Ryan Strachnitsky says he's enjoyed every minute of the intense physiotherapy at a Calgary clinic. The 19-year-old is back home after spending 4 weeks at a hospital in Philadelphia.
It's a lot more vigorous here. I'm enjoying every minute of it, and they're a great facility.
Drag me somewhere? Yeah, we'll get this for
Now that he's here and we've done the assessment, we are really looking at Ryan's short term, which really is kind of 6 months to a year goals, and then his long-term goals, what he's wanting in the next really 2 to 5 years. And Ryan, like every 19-year-old, just really aspires to go back to what he knew. And so our focus here and our approach here is very functional in what his therapy is going to look like and how that really translates to real life. A lot of what we do here will reflect what happened in Philadelphia in terms of the standing, the load, weight bearing, but just at a different intensity. Because again, he's outpatient now. His body has recovered a little bit more and differently, so he's able to tolerate more. Even Ryan, when you talk to Ryan, he'll tell you that this has been very, very different for him. And the fact that we've had him stand, as you've seen, has made his body respond to different stimulation, right? Because in Philly, he wouldn't have done that. It would have been too early for him to do something like that.
I think the assessment, I realized that I got some movement back in my core muscles. They're pretty weak, but they're getting back, so pretty excited. They should come back stronger, and who knows what'll happen after. Just seeing friends and family, being closer to them, staying in a hotel, kind of being more independent without nurse's care. But I'm enjoying it. I got friends and family all the time, and always doing something. Being back in Airdrie and Calgary and going to Stampede out in public, I mean, it's like when I was before the accident, and I mean, it's just a little different, that's all. But I don't want to get too comfortable, because hopefully I want to be walking again someday. But in the meantime, I'll just get comfortable and as strong as I can.
2 people were killed in a car accident near Granham, Alberta around 7 o'clock this morning. Police say a Honda Civic carrying 2 passengers crossed into the eastbound lane on Highway 515, crashing into a GMC Sierra truck. Both the female driver and female passenger of the Civic died at the scene. The driver of the truck was transported to hospital with unknown injuries. The cause of the crash is under investigation. The United Conservative Party of Alberta came up with a couple of big by-election wins last night, and it wasn't even close. UCP member Devin Dreeshen of Innisfail-Sylvan Lake took his riding by almost 7,000 votes, and Layla Goodrich won hers in Fort McMurray-Conklin by around 1,500 votes. Goodrich takes over for Brian Jean, who stepped down earlier this year after failing to win the UCP leadership. At a rally in Edmonton last night, marking the 1-year anniversary of the formation of the UCP, Jason Kenney told attendees to keep their eyes on the prize. Kenney addressed some friction in some candidate nomination races. The party had nominated 20 candidates of the 87 constituencies. There have been some disputes among candidates in some nomination races, along with allegations of backroom meddling. The UCP was created after members of the Alberta PCs and Wild Rose Party united. A general election is set for the spring of 2019 in our province. The wildfires continue to burn in the Okanagan area, with a blaze by Mount Anias being one of the largest. Since we're east of the Okanagan Valley, there's a possibility Lethbridge will see a change in air quality. Those who have asthmatic symptoms might want to stay indoors should smoke make its way into our region.
We're usually telling people, especially if there's a warning out about air, is to stay indoors. Sometimes you can go to a mall because they usually have air conditioning in malls. And if you're in your car, to make sure you put it on recirculate so you're not bringing in bad air into the car.
Elamir also said to keep a close eye on the progress of any smoke online by visiting the Government of Alberta website. The fires were initially started by lightning on Tuesday, but crews in the area are making good progress in putting them out. The numbers are officially in from the April 28th MS Walk in Lethbridge. This year, 471 walkers raised just over $130,000. The goal for the MS Society was $137,000, so pretty close to reaching that goal. The annual walk is in support of those who are living with multiple sclerosis and helps to support various programs and research. There's an organization called Open Doors Canada, which reaches millions of people for Christ. Gary Stagg is the executive director of Open Doors, and he says one of the worst countries in the world when it comes to violence against Christians is Pakistan.
I just want to mention about Pakistan is that it's number 5 on the list, but it's actually number 1 for violence against Christians. So, we use a rating different tools to rate persecution in a country. And one of those things is violence, obviously. North Korea still comes to the top when we look at the overall score, but Pakistan still suffers the most violence against Christians.
Catch my entire interview with Mr. Stagg as he discusses the top 5 worst countries in the world when it comes to persecuting Christians later in our show. It was on this date that race rioting hits the streets of Detroit. Britain's Prince Andrew marries Fergie, and Vanessa Williams gives up her Miss American crown. This is Today in History for July the 23rd.
July 23rd, 1967.
Black day in July, Motor City madness has touched the countryside.
A week of race-related rioting erupts in Detroit following a police raid on an after-hours club. The violence kills 43 people and injures more than 1,000 others, destroying dozens of homes and businesses. It happens soon after race-related rioting in Newark, New Jersey claims 24 lives. 1885. Former President Ulysses S. Grant dies in Mount McGregor, New York, at the age of 63. Grant led Union forces to victory in the American Civil War before serving in the White House. 1986. Wedding bells for Britain's royal family. Prince Andrew marries Sarah Ferguson, better known as Fergie, in London's Westminster Abbey. The couple divorces a decade later. 1984. Vanessa Williams, the first black Miss America, also becomes the first to give up her crown. Williams relinquishes her title after nude photographs of her taken years earlier are published in Penthouse magazine. And 2000.
When I turned pro, I felt that I would contend in a number of major championships. Now, would I win them is a different story.
Tiger Woods becomes the youngest golfer to complete a career Grand Slam, winning the British Open at age 24. Today in History, July 23rd. Ed Donahue, The Associated Press.
I was a very young Tiger Woods, wasn't it? It'll be a little dicey if you want to get in a game of golf and hit the links. Some showers are in the forecast. I'll have complete weather details coming up in just a moment. We had some shower activity today. Tonight, a slight chance of showers again with a low near 10. A 30% chance of rain tomorrow with a high near 20. It should clear somewhat on Wednesday, bringing more sunshine and a high of 22. A good chance of rain developing again on Thursday with a high near 23. And Friday, more showers with a high again near 23 degrees. Saturday should be mainly sunny and 26. Looking at our almanac, the average high for this time of year is 26 and an average low of 11. Highest temperature on this date was recorded in 2003 at 38 degrees, and the record low was 5 in 1982. Sunrise was at 5:50, sunset at 9:26. Let's look at tomorrow's temperatures across the country now. Lots of sunshine on tap for Vancouver, as they should see a daytime high near 26. Victoria will be mainly sunny as well, and 28. Showers are developing in Calgary tomorrow with a high of only 14 expected. Rain and 17 for Edmonton on Tuesday. It'll be mainly sunny in Regina at 23 tomorrow. Saskatoon will have a mixture of sun and cloud and a high near 19. Increasing clouds in Winnipeg tomorrow and a high expected near 23. A chance of thunder showers in Toronto tomorrow with a high near 27. Ottawa will have rain at 27. Montreal had a heat warning today. Tomorrow, a good chance of showers and a high near 28. Over in the Maritimes, Fredericton, New Brunswick will be mostly cloudy at 29. Halifax, Nova Scotia will be overcast at 27. Charlottetown, PEI will have sun mixed with cloud and 29. And St. John's, Newfoundland will be mainly cloudy and should get up to 22 degrees tomorrow. The federal government has failed to find a buyer from the private sector for the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. Kinder Morgan had been working with Ottawa to identify another buyer before July 22nd. So it appears as though the federal government will be the proud new owner of the $4.5 billion project. The final sale should be approved in late August or September. Now, construction costs will be around $7.4 billion. The founders of Crew Marketing Partners joined me in studio recently to discuss a potential career kids should choose. Braden Douglas says when it comes to a solid job, they should really consider the trades.
The trades business in Canada, even around the world, is going to become much more important because with all this technology and machinery, it's going to break down. Who's going to fix it? Who's going to maintain it? What are those kind of skills and jobs that are going to be needed to actually be that back end for these things?
Catch my entire interview with Braden Douglas as he also discusses the key elements of becoming a successful entrepreneur coming up later in our show. Southern Alberta is known for being a major player in the Canadian agriculture scene. Bridge City News reporter Josie Foster hit the roads to ask the tough questions about controversial topics in the farming and food world. Each night this week will reveal part of her findings. This is part one now of The Organic Dispute.
The agriculture sector has changed dramatically over the past 100 years. I wanted to know how these changes have shaped our current food system. I wanted to understand the buzz around the organic food movement. What's a GMO, and what's the impact on society of a food system that's driven by money? Canada is the 5th largest exporter of food in the world, yet 30% of the growing population is malnourished. Farming experts say genetic engineering is the solution to feed everyone. Still, millions of pounds of food are thrown away every day. After talking with agriculture experts, I found that they all have the same goal. They want society to be well nourished, but they have different approaches on how to do it.
There's a confusion about selective breeding and actual genetic modification, which is taking a piece of DNA and putting it into the other DNA.
We've been breeding plants for thousands of years, and most people aren't opposed necessarily to, say, kind of the natural breeding that goes on where pollen from certain plants will fertilize another plant.
Scientists change the DNA of the plant to make it less attractive to pests and weeds.
This thing that's toxic to this pest, and if we put these together, then we don't have to spray everybody else. We just know that if that pest bites this piece of fruit, it's going to die.
4 GMO crops are currently allowed in Canada: soy, corn, sugar beets, and canola. Most plants at the supermarket have been modified to make it shinier or bigger, but they aren't actually GMOs. There are 13 ways to modify a plant, and only 5 of them produce what's known as a GMO. Dr. Igor Kovalchuk works to produce GMO cannabis for commercial production. He uses one of the 5 methods that produce GMOs. He calls it transgenics, which means he injects DNA from foreign species into the marijuana plant.
Transgenic approach is a precise approach, right? So we're not doing things randomly. We know precisely what we're introducing, right? So we can actually nowadays very quickly and easily sequence the genome.
In general, genetic modification is said to be safe and beneficial.
You can take a trait from something, from like a variety of wheat that's grown on a coastal region and may have certain types of resistance and traits built in, and then you can breed it with something that's maybe grown in like a really arid type area, and then you can get traits for drought tolerance. And so when you breed the two, which would pretty much never happen naturally, you get you can find plants that maybe exhibit the best of both worlds, right?
I thought GMO wheat was illegal in Canada. When I asked Gretzinger to clarify, he explained that he's giving an example of crossbreeding 2 types of wheat. All of these ways of creating plant variations fall under what the government calls novel foods, or GMs. But then what's a GMO? Like it says novel foods, or like GMs, but then it's like, well then where's this term GMO? Like is it the same thing?
Yeah, when we talk about a plant with a novel trait, that's usually a GMO crop.
The science behind genetic engineering is going to make it possible for us to be able to meet that global demand.
If it's done responsibly, right, and I believe that scientists in Canada, I know regulations very well, do it very responsibly.
Health Canada says the government uses scientists with specialized expertise to analyze the data that determines their regulations on GMOs. I asked where this data comes from and found out they're provided by the product developers themselves. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency follows the same method of retrieving data when they test the safety of chemicals used to manage pests and weeds.
One of the biggest things that we in general agriculture have lost, especially in the last 60, 80 years, is that we've gone to production and we've lost the nutrient-dense value of our food. We've lost the quality end of it, and we're really here, we're just being big commodity producers in the general picture.
In an agricultural setting, when we're producing food, we're asking the ecosystem to provide a service. So it's not a function, so there's a difference there between functions and services. We're putting limits on what we want the soil to do. So we're saying, soil, I want 10,000 bags of canola, whatever. Now we have to make sure the soil has the capacity to do that. And we're running into a problem now where, for a long time it was physical manipulation. So we tilled, the soil got old, it didn't work, we went to another field and we tilled that, right? And then we got the green revolution. So we tilled the heck out of it. Now, green revolution, we can add fertilizers and we can grow crops. Awesome, great. Now we're at this point where we can't add any more fertilizers because it's not doing anything. So now, what's next?
Tomorrow, in part 2 of the organic dispute, Josie investigates the controversy surrounding glyphosate, one of the most common herbicides used around the world. Now, here's a look at today's markets. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, 3 are dead and 12 others remain in hospital after a mass shooting in Toronto's Greektown last night. The dead include a 10-year-old girl, an 18-year-old woman, and the gunman, who was 29. Police are still searching for a motive to the shooting. When you see news happening, make sure you drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. And if you missed any of today's top stories, check out our full newscast online at bridgecitynews.ca. The Christian outreach organization known as Open Doors Canada has a list of some of the worst countries in the world when it comes to persecuting Christians. The group's executive director, Gary Stagg, has details next. But first, here's a look at what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Come to the Great Canadian Garage Sale at the Lethbridge Exhibition Park's main pavilion on July 28th beginning at 9 a.m. Come look at over 70 private garage sales in one location, offering unique items and tons of treasures, from household items to furniture and more. Booth rentals can be done online at greatcanadiangaragesale.com. Admission is $6.50 or $5 with a non-perishable food donation to the Lethbridge Food Bank. Shakespeare in the Park 2018 season is featuring The Tempest. Enjoy performances every Thursday and Friday at 7 p.m. in Galt Gardens Amphitheatre until August 10th. This event is free, but donations after the show are gratefully appreciated. For more information, call Kate at 403-329-4568. The 10th annual Care for Kids Golf Tournament will be held Thursday, August 30th at Paradise Canyon Golf Resort. Sponsored by Canadian Tire and support of the Lethbridge Food Bank, this event features a barbecue lunch, steak dinner, and a silent and live auction. Plus, this year's tournament will also support Canadian Tire Jumpstart. To register as a player or sponsor and for more information, visit careforkidslethbridge.com. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
Groups around the world suffer persecution for their beliefs. Now, the largest group undergoing persecution happens to be Christians. Joining me now from Halton Hills, Ontario, to discuss this is Gary Stagg, Executive Director of Open Doors Canada. Welcome to BCN, Gary.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure being here.
You bet. Now, what is Open Doors all about? Can you explain it to our viewers?
Open Doors began more than 60 years ago. It was started by a young Dutch missionary at the time by the name of Brother Andrew, who felt the call of God to smuggle Bibles behind the Iron Curtain. Since then, it has grown to work in more than 60 countries around the world. And we go into the most difficult places where it's most difficult to be a Christian, to provide Bibles and training and prayer support. This year alone, we supplied 2.5 million Bibles and Christian literature. We will serve more than 45,000 people in need, train 870,000 believers, and share the stories of the persecuted church and advocate on their behalf.
That's amazing. Now, can you give me a bit of an update on Pastor Andrew Brunson's case in Turkey? He's a pastor who's been in prison there for what, the last couple of years?
Yes, he's been in prison since October 7th, 2016, sorry. He was a pastor in Turkey for 23 years until his imprisonment. And just this past week, 2 days ago, on a few days ago, I should say, on July 18th, we were hopeful for his release because of a new trial that he was given. However, we all know that that didn't take place. He wasn't released, and now they've given him a new trial date, and that's October 12th. And by that time, he would have completed more than 2 years of imprisonment. If convicted at that time, he could face 35 years in prison, which is essentially a life sentence. Incidentally, he celebrated his 50th birthday in prison in January.
So what was the reason for his imprisonment?
Well, the 62-page indictment against Pastor Brunson really basically just said he was imprisoned for Christianization, calling it an act of terror. The American Center for Law and Justice said that the authorities have presented really no evidence at all against him, and they've accused the government of just using him as a political pawn. Turkish President Erdogan suggested back in September that a deal could be made between to release Brunson if the U.S. would hand over the main guy that he thought is the leader of the coup against the government last year. That hasn't happened, and so he just sits in prison. The bottom line is that the Turkish authorities still have not provided one good reason for depriving Pastor Brunson of his freedom.
What's his health like?
He's doing very well, and his spirits are very high, and we're really happy about that. The man is just absolutely amazing in his attitude, his Christian demeanor, especially his attitude of forgiveness is just incredible.
Are his wife and children still living in Turkey?
No, his wife his wife Noreen and daughter Jacqueline are not living in Turkey. They're back home in the U.S.
Now, is there anything viewers can do to help?
I would say that, from our perspective, the only thing that we can do is, it sounds kind of trite, but we can pray. But prayer is the absolute best thing that we can do. I know that our ministry really emphasizes prayer. We are built on prayer. Brother Andrew once said that prayers can go where we cannot go. There are no borders, no prison walls, no doors that are closed to us when we pray. And that's, I think, where some of the name of Open Doors comes from, because all doors are open when we pray. So we need to pray for encouragement for Pastor Brunson and his family at this time, that they will continue to be strong in the face of all that they're going through.
Yeah, God will give them strength, absolutely. Let's talk about Nigeria now. Most of us have heard about the terror group Boko Haram, but I understand that the recent attacks on Christians have been coming from Fulani herdsmen or Fulani militia, who are also known as Muslim extremists. What's going on there?
Yeah, in the last 3 years, Fulani herdsmen, who indeed are Muslim cattle herdsmen, herders, and they've been responsible actually now for more killings than Boko Haram. Last month, more attacks took place over 4 days in 12 Christian villages, killing over 200 Christians and displacing more than 3,000 people. So this violence has claimed thousands of lives in Nigeria's Middle Belt, which is located between the north, which is predominantly Muslim, and the south of Nigeria, which is predominantly Christian. And so we have this middle belt in between, and that middle belt has a diversity of people and cultures, and it's also the center of Christian presence for the north of Nigeria. And so as the Fulani herders are increasingly migrating to the south, and they're migrating because they're running out of pasture, they're running out of water for their flocks, and so they're moving to the south, and they've come into conflict with mostly Christian grain farmers that are there in that area. And so there's this socioeconomic factor, but there's also the religious factor, where these herdsmen have been indoctrinized. Some say they've been radicalized by Muslim missionaries from Saudi Arabia and Iran, with this philosophy that obligates them to bring the non-Islamic under the rule of Islam. And Christians in particular are a target for these people. And we know that between 75 and 88% of the victims of these people are Christian.
How about if we arm some of these Christian grain farmers, protect themselves and their families and their crops?
Well, I'm not sure about that. We don't supply arms to people. That's not our mandate, obviously. But and I'm not even sure if they do have arms. Maybe they do, and maybe they've just been overpowered.
Wow. Now, how about the schoolgirls who were kidnapped by Boko Haram? Do you have an update there?
If you're speaking of the ones that were kidnapped in 2014, there were about half of those girls have been released, or I think there was 103 that were released through negotiations. 3 escaped on their own, and unfortunately, a number of them died trying to escape. But on February 19th this year, Boko Haram kidnapped 110 girls from a secondary school in another town in southern Nigeria. After some talks, all of those girls were freed, except for one girl, the only Christian that was in the whole group. Her name is Leah, and she's the only one that wasn't released. The father told local media that he heard that she wasn't released because she refused to denounce her Christian faith.
Wow.
And so she's still there, unfortunately.
Have we heard what her health is like at all? What kind of state she's in?
Haven't heard anything about her at all.
Now, what about Russia? They just hosted the World Cup of Soccer. You know, lots of partying and celebrating. But what about the persecution of Christians in Vladimir Putin's country?
Well, Russia's not on the 50 countries on the World Watch List, Open Doors World Watch List, but it is definitely on the persecution watch list. In 2016, Russia introduced a package of anti-terrorism laws, which put tighter restriction on missionary and evangelism activity. Basically, these laws make it illegal to share your faith in homes, online, or anywhere but recognized state-sanctioned church buildings. So there's no more visas for missions workers to go into Russia. For groups, there's no access for groups to go in to evangelize. And there are, of course, the threats of deportation for violations against that. Just recently, 2 African students from a Pentecostal church were fined and ordered to leave the country because they appeared in videos of worship services that were posted on social media. You have to be very careful with social media these days.
No kidding, that's right. Now, Donald Trump has been spending a bit of time with North Korea's Kim Jong-un. They're talking about nuclear weapons. But let's talk more about Christians in prison camps and how bad are things in North Korea for Christians?
Well, things are really bad for Christians in North Korea. If you're even suspected of being a Christian in North Korea, you are automatically put into a prison camp. If you're found with a Bible, it could very well most likely mean the death sentence for you. There are thousands upon thousands of Christians that we know of. It's hard to ascertain the exact number because of the type of environment that it is, the country that it is. We don't have total access, but we know that there are tens of thousands of Christians that are in brutal labor camps today.
Last year, churches in Egypt experienced some serious persecution with bombings taking place. Now that I hear there's a mob attacked a church in Minya, Egypt, protesting against the legalization. Tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, there was a new church that was opening, and again, Egypt brought out a new law saying that any new churches need to go through the process of legalization. So they went through that process. it reached the ears of the Muslim population because it's an 80% Muslim area where the church was in this particular community. And then because of that, they started protesting outside the church building as they were preparing to open that. And then things from there escalated. And now Christians are really fearful for their lives because the violence is starting to escalate against them again.
Wow. Mother Teresa was held in very high esteem in India for her tireless care of the poor and the sick, but how times have changed now. The Indian government has ordered all the country's states to inspect every childcare home run by the Order of Nuns founded by Mother Teresa.
I was in India in May, and an interesting comment was made to me that it was heard to be said by one of the government officials in India that Mother Teresa is no longer welcome in our country. Hard to fathom when you think about it, you know, that thinking of all the good that she's done. And really it's just a part of an attempt of the government to undermine the work and presence of Christianity in India. The Modi government, since the Modi government was brought in 2014, the rise of persecution against Christians has been just escalating at an alarming rate. We're very, very concerned about it. It went from number 33 on the World Watch list up to number 15 last year, and now this year it's up to number 11. And so it just tells you about what's going on, and every day we're hearing more and more about what's happening in India, and it's very concerning to us. Churches and pastors and evangelists are coming under brutal attack by the Hindu extremists. In many provinces in India, they brought in an anti-conversion law which limits people from other faiths accepting Christianity, and they're trying to convert everybody back to Hinduism. We call it it's called the saffronization of India, or the Hindunization of India.
Yeah, it really makes you appreciate the freedoms we have right here in Canada. You know, the freedom to worship. You know, we only have a few moments left here, Gary. Tell me about which are the top 10 most dangerous countries for Christians right now around the world.
Well, again, we published the World Watch list. Again, let me give you the top 5.
Sure.
If that's okay.
Yeah.
North Korea is number 1 on the list. North Korea has been number 1 in that same spot for the past 17 years. Very, very close to that is Afghanistan. In fact, Afghanistan were just like a fraction away this year from being neck to neck with North Korea. And so they almost tied for first place. But North Korea has been in that number 1 place for 17 years in a row. Very interesting, isn't it? Afghanistan, again, is number 2. And then in third place, we have Somalia, where they basically said there is absolutely no room whatsoever for Christianity in this country. And then after that, we have Sudan. And then number 5, we have Pakistan. I just want to mention about Pakistan is that it's number 5 on the list, but it's actually number 1 for violence against Christians. So, you know, we use a rating, different tools to rate persecution in a country, and one of those things is violence, obviously. North Korea still comes to the top when we look at the overall score, but Pakistan still suffers the most violence against Christians.
So as Canadians and Christians, we definitely have to be very careful where we spend our extra time, where we travel around the world. Gary Stagg, Executive Director of Open Doors Canada, thanks so much for your time today.
You're very welcome. Pleasure for me to be here.
New stats show that 98% of Canadian businesses have less than 100 employees and 55% have less than 4. Small business is a major part of our Canadian economy. Joining me now is the founder of Crew Marketing Partners from Surrey, British Columbia, and a successful entrepreneur in his own right, Mr. Braden Douglas. Welcome to Bridge City News.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's great.
So tell me a little bit about yourself. You're an entrepreneur as well, and it all started with a little bit of sweat equity and then much more, didn't it?
Yeah, well, Crew Marketing Partners, when it first started, I went to my wife and said, "Hun, we want to start this business, an agency." And I come from a bigger background of Procter & Gamble and Frito-Lay, and how it works is you have this big company with good marketing strategies and a big team, and then you kind of work with all these different agencies from web and branding and digital marketing and all these kind of different things, and that works really well for big business. But for that 98% of all businesses who usually don't have a big in-house marketing team or a very small one, how do you actually do that? How do you work with these plans? How do you actually create strategies and brands to really make an impact? And that's where Crew actually was born out of and started 10 years ago. But it was started out of our basement, and now we have 3 offices across Canada and 65 employees. And
a little bit of a challenge too, because right at the same time you're starting your business, another little addition to the family was on the way, right? So that made it even more challenging.
Yeah, and that's right. And I actually say to entrepreneurs right now is that if you want to start your own business, it's fantastic. We had a child at the exact same time, pretty much a week apart. Once we started the business, my son came, and it was crazy. I would say don't do that if you can. We got through it, but usually in those first 3 months, you're not really thinking straight. You're not really sleeping. Plus, you've got this business going on. It was a challenge.
Country superstar Garth Brooks once said, "You know, I may not be the best singer in the world, but I took marketing in college." So he really knows how to market himself, and he's done a pretty successful job with that, hasn't he?
Done very well.
So how important is really self-promotion and marketing for your business to become a big success?
You know what, I think that marketing is one of the disciplines that most entrepreneurs and most small businesses, they overlook. But it's an absolutely critical part of their business, because you look at your product and your service. What are you really selling? Do people have a need for that? Who's your target audience? Are you selling to the right people? What price point are you going to sell it at? How are you going to sell it? Then promotion. In today's day, we have so many options of digital avenues, social media, regular advertising. You have TV and radio and print and billboard and all these different things. And I think it's actually overwhelming. They have no idea what to do next and what's working and what's not working. And so I find that with a lot more options, people actually make poorer decisions.
So why do you think it is, Braden, that many businesses fail within the first 5 years, especially when it comes to restaurants?
Well, I think having worked with entrepreneurs all over, everybody starts out with great intentions. And actually a great book that I read is called The E-Myth by Michael Gerber. And he talks in there that people think, oh, I love food, I'm gonna open a restaurant. And they're gonna come in, they're gonna open this restaurant, and they're gonna, of course people are gonna come, but they actually don't have a very solid business plan. They don't choose the right location. They may not even talk to their target audience. What do you really need? What do you really want? Maybe they actually don't have enough money to really make the restaurant what it should be, and so they cheap out, and it just doesn't create a great piece, and then they wonder why it fails. And
how about maybe doing some research in that area as well, in that region?
Oh, you have to.
You know, like what is wanted? You know, what are people looking for in this particular area? Instead of saying, this is what I want, I'm going to put it there.
That's right.
Well, you know.
But sometimes it works both ways, because we do a lot of consumer research, right? And people can tell you what they know, but they can't tell you what could be. And so I think you need both. You really need that entrepreneurial vision to say, you know what, here's what people could really, really do with, and what they could really need, and here's what they're really asking for, and how do we make that together? And that's usually where you get new innovation and new stuff happening.
So what are the keys then to running a very successful business besides having that amazing vision?
Well, I think, it's obviously, you start with vision, you start with leadership, but then it's having a good, solid strategic plan. How much are you going to potentially sell this year? How are you going to make that? At what price point? Are you actually going to be able to make margins from that? And I think that most people, they don't understand everything that goes into making a business possible. And it's a lot of work. And I think people underestimate how much work it is, how difficult it could be. And so my advice to a lot of people is that you need to surround yourself with experts, great lawyers, accountants, hire good employees who really understand and can make up for your weaknesses. And the mistake I see most people making is that they hire people because they can't afford really good people, so they hire them too junior, and then they wonder why they're not getting great advice, and then it starts to spiral downhill from that.
So let's say if I were to buy Tim Hortons restaurants, for instance, I would make sure that I have a little bit of food industry experience, and as well maybe hire somebody who maybe worked within the chain itself or had other fast food experience, bring them on board. Because I mean, let's say I'm coming from a trucking company and I want to open up a fast food chain or a restaurant, it may not be that successful then, right?
Well, here's actually the good thing with franchise businesses, right? So Tim Hortons,
they have the training
McDonald's,
available?
They've got great training available.
Okay.
You follow a system, you follow a process. And it was actually, franchises are really designed for people who want to go into business, but may not have the experience in that industry, but they'll teach you and train you and do these things, but you have to follow their rules. You can't just go rogue and have this vision of, oh, well, I'd like a McDuckin sandwich. And they're like, you know what, that's not going to fly. I'm sorry, you can't do that. But you just have to follow in line. And you know what, if you follow the recipe, it's very successful.
So for a lot of entrepreneurs who are watching, what are the 2 major marketing and leadership tips you would offer, besides maybe wearing a lot of different hats when you start your own business, right? Be willing to get your hands dirty and do everything that's needed to be done, right?
Yeah, well, I get the question of like, hey, what should I do first? What's the most important thing? And if you look at marketing is about the 4 Ps. You have product, price, place, and promotion. The most important thing is having the right product, the right service. Is it actually really good? Do people really want this in the first place? And that is the number one, I believe, the decision you have to make. And I would say it's difficult sometimes for me as a consultant when people say, hey, Braden, check out this business. I'm really proud of it. And sometimes you have to tell them that their baby is ugly. And you have to say, I'm sorry, but your product and service is not that good yet.
I think I remember that Seinfeld episode, but go ahead.
That's right, yeah, and it's just the reality. And the other one is to say, well, how are you going to promote this in an efficient and effective way that the right audience will say, you know what, I love that. I'm going to actually go and purchase that and be a loyal consumer and customer with you for life. And those 2 elements, I would say, those where you have to really focus in on.
What about social media marketing? How relevant and how important is that today? Facebook, Twitter, Instagram?
If you are,
LinkedIn, especially if you're a business owner, right?
Absolutely. If you're in a business-to-business environment, LinkedIn is one of your number 1 lead sources and generation aspects. If you're business-to-consumer, you can't avoid social media. Whether if you have a younger demographic, it's going to be Instagram and Snapchat. Facebook is still popular. You still have Twitter, which is it's going well, but it's kind of coming down. But social media marketing is the future. It's about communication. It's about effectively talking with people with where they're at, and I would say it needs to be a big part of your strategy.
So what about tips for consumers, Braden? What tips would you give when it comes to getting the very best customer experience out of a company?
The best thing is that if you're a consumer, never before in history have you had the most power to be able to command great customer service. Because now with the internet too, is that if you post a bad review, it's bad. It's going to actually affect that business even more. And I think some people when they buy things, they get mad and they just kind of go off the rails. And that really bugs me because I think they forget that, no, they're just real people trying their best. You may have had a bad experience, but I work with business owners and business people. They genuinely care. They really want to have a successful business. They want you to be happy. And if they messed up, give them an opportunity to do that. But it also is forcing businesses to be really good. You can't cut corners.
Held accountable, right?
You're accountable, much more accountable. And so I think that there's a really good rub, and accountability creates, I would say, makes things better. Competition makes people better because you can't rely on your laurels. You have to continually progress.
What's interesting is when I worked in Ottawa a number of years ago, one of my fellow reporters says to me, he looked at my boots and says, your boots are falling apart. What's going on? I said, I know, they're like 4 months old. He said, you should shame them on Twitter. I'm like, what are you talking about? Take a couple of pictures, put it on Twitter, tweet it out to them and see what happens. I did, and they sent me new boots within 3 weeks.
No way, really?
Free, yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so like you said, the power of social media.
It's absolutely true.
And sticking up for yourself as a consumer, right? Which is really important. Now, agriculture is a big business here in southern Alberta and across many regions in Canada here. But what about urban businesses as well that are really thriving right now? What are you seeing some of the businesses that maybe we should really keep an eye on, Braden?
One of the, so we're looking at trends all the time. We're seeing this, even in agriculture, we're seeing so much innovation happening. Automation, technology. We're working with, big combines that can practically run themselves and through GPS systems and everything. But some of the businesses is still coming down to how do I effectively use this technology in my business? So I think you're going to see a rise in service providers and consultants helping people navigate the next changes. I think you're going to see more education-based services to help people keep up with the changing pace. But more importantly, I think the trades business in Canada, even around the world, is going to become much more important because with all this technology and machinery, it's going to break down. Who's going to fix it? Who's going to maintain it? What are those kind of skills and jobs that are going to be needed to actually be that back end for these things?
You know what's scary as well, speaking of technology, all of the automation right now. I remember the days you could talk to the person at the cashier, bagging your groceries. Now you can scan your own groceries. Those jobs are gone. You've got the automated tellers. You used to go to your bank, used to pay your bills, get the money from the bank. That's kind of scary. I mean, technology is nice in one sense, but in the other sense, it's eliminating jobs, Braden.
But here's I think people, when they see that, they're like, oh, it's eliminating jobs, like what's going to happen? I think it's just creating a displacement. And a displacement means that at a momentary time, they're going to shift to something else. Because a lot of the things that people are doing are not necessarily creating value, right? And so for me, it's like, as a bank teller, I don't necessarily need somebody to just say, hey, I'd like $30 out of the bank, and they give it to me. I can go to the bank machine and just get that out. And so that person actually isn't really creating value. And so what's going to happen is, as technology displaces undervalued jobs, it's going to open up new ones. So what's going to become more important in my mind is people still want great experiences. They still want to have that face-to-face, but maybe in different contexts. And so you're going to just see people migrating towards other avenues. Hospitality is still going to be important, to be like, hey, how are you doing? This is great. Welcome here. They still want that connection, but only in value-added situations.
I'm glad you brought that up. How important is the face-to-face interaction with business to consumer, as opposed to always just email marketing campaigns, social media marketing campaigns? It's still pretty important to talk to the person one-on-one, isn't it?
Well, the underlying aspect of all purchases is all about trust. For me, it's like, I'm not going to buy something that is important to me without trusting somebody necessarily. Either I'm going to trust the manufacturer and that brand, like an Apple product. I'm going to say, oh, you know what? I trust Apple because of, hey, they're credible, they're this, and so I might buy online and I don't need to talk. But with other situations, I actually want to know, well, who's really behind this? And I want to talk with them. I want to know, do they have my best interests in mind?
Well, this is why a lot of politicians go door to door, right? All the campaigning. Doug Ford is going out in Ontario right now. The election's next month in Ontario. I mean, people want to get to know, who is this guy, right? Why should I vote for you?
Absolutely. And social media can do a great job too, because people want to get behind the scenes. They don't want that polished look all the time of, well, this person's just media trained and they're going to say all the right things. But I think they want to know what's behind it. Who are you really? Like, you're saying one thing on camera, but I want to know, what are you really like in real life? And sometimes you can't always tell in that moment, but I think we're going to see a lot more behind the scenes, a little bit more raw stuff happening, even in media.
Now, you've got an expression as well with Crew Marketing Partners: never throw a bad party again. What is that all about, Braden? Talk to me.
Never throw a bad party again. Well, there was a lesson I learned in university, and so I was part of this business competition, and we won. And so I was like, oh, there was about 40 people on the team, and I thought, oh, I'm going to throw this great party with the organizing committee. And so there's 4 or 5 of us, and so we had this all planned out, and we're going to have togas, and I thought it was going to be so much fun.
Lots of good food.
Oh yeah, there's food, and it's university. It's kind of, sure. Think about that kind of moment, right? And so the night of the party came, and it's supposed to start at 7 o'clock. 7 o'clock rolls around, nobody's showing up yet. 7:30, my one friend Steve comes in. I'm like, okay, maybe people are just fashionably late. 8 o'clock, one more person, and hardly anybody came. Nobody came. And it reminded me to say, well, why? It's because I didn't do my research. I actually didn't know that, there was competing exams happening, that people didn't really actually want to party at that week, that there's so many other things happening. And I think when my lesson to even business owners and other people is, do your homework. Don't just jump into business because you think it's going to be a great idea at that time. You have to really understand what's happening in the market. Do people have a demand for what you're offering? And is it going to be really good and exciting for people, or else they just won't come anymore? There's too many options.
How important is your faith in your business and help your business to become very successful at the same time? Tell me about that role, how you're really leaning on God too.
Oh, you know what? When I was 25 years old, I was at Frito-Lay, 9:30 at night, and I was marketing Miss Vicky's chips. Oh. And I thought, what am I doing with my life? I'm just trying to get people to eat more chips, to buy more. And there's got to be more to life than this. And actually, this is where I came around and thought to myself, you know what, if God is really important to my life, am I making him number one? Is he really number one in my life? Or I just like to maybe use it in a crutch situation. And I had this decision to say, you know what, no, if I'm really going to seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, then that should influence all my decisions. It should influence the way I think about business, about life, about what am I doing with my job and my career. And so I started to just say, no, it actually influences all aspects and really saying, you know, it needs to translate this. And so even when I started our company, I wanted to base it off of really good, strong values, good character. And not everybody, you know, we have, you know, 60 plus employees, and about maybe 20% of them are actually, say, Christians or whatever, but the rest of them is just saying, we don't hide behind it, but I want them to feel like we have a great culture, it's loving, it's caring, it's professional. We want to be the best marketers we can and help our clients win, but we're not going to sacrifice our ethics and morals to do that.
That's great to hear that. You know, Braden Douglas, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. Thanks so much for joining us from Surrey, British Columbia with Crew Marketing Partners.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and have a great night.